Hello, everybody. I see people are trickling in. We are going to give some time here as people join. Thank you for coming. This is Austin Belial with Find'em. I am lead content for our marketing team, and we've got a great panel here today. I'm going to start by just giving everyone a minute to listen to some music, kind of catch up on what's happening, get it comfortable, get a nice seat. And then I will pass it off to Todd on the panel here, who's going to be leading our discussion. So everybody take just a couple minutes. Thanks for joining. Thanks for registering and spending your afternoon with us. This is leveraging technology for better recruiting outcomes. Again, for everybody joining, we're excited to have you. And we're excited to have a great panel. So I am going to go off video. I'm going to be here monitoring the chat, letting everybody know, answering any questions that anyone might have, but the floor is now Todd's, and I'm going to pass it to him. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Austin. We are here talking about tech stacks and tech stack overload and tech stack consolidation, companies having 10, 20, 30, or 100 tools, talent acquisition tools, talent technology tools. We're going to talk about why this is a challenge right now, and we're going to get into what to do about it, how to prevent it, nip it in the bud. First, let's talk about who's here. We have Marilyn, Pearson, Hendricks, Ben Eubanks, and Shane Noe. It's a bit of an all-star panel. Each of these people has basically talked about this topic on their own and could do so. Each of them has either dealt with it as a practitioner in-house or consulting with customers, their clients about it, tech stacks and consolidating and streamlining tech stacks. Let's do a quick round of introductions. Tell us who you are. Kind of go around the horn, maybe start with Shane arbitrarily and go from there.
Sure. I'm Shane Noe, based in the Bay Area. I'm the VP of People at ClickUp. ClickUp's a 1,000 person pre-IPO tech company, also advise for Find'em, so it's great to be here. I describe myself as a recovering finance guy in HR. I spent the first part of my career at Apple, Google, and Box, all in finance roles before coming over to the HR side of things at Box, and then Okta, and now ClickUp. So I spent a lot of time in recruiting ops, people analytics prior to expanding my scope more broadly. But yeah, excited for the conversation.
Before it. Either of you.
Ladies first, Marilyn.
Thank you, Ben. Always a gentleman. My name is Marilyn Pearson Hendricks, or MPH for short, and really honored to be here and join you for this discussion. A little bit about my background is I'm actually a recovering HR practitioner, 10 years in seat doing primarily digital transformation back in the day, and then about 20 years ago, I moved over onto the vendor side and worked in software scale-ups in a variety of firms for about 10 years, and then also 10 years in seat with two consulting companies. So a little bit of a lot of different things, and so have a lot of war stories and insights, and hopefully some things to share during our discussion here today. I'm CEO of WorkTech Advisory, and my clients are the emerging tech vendors in the space, and I work with founders and their senior leadership teams to unlock their revenue potential. Over to you, Ben.
Tremendous. So excited to be here with everybody. Looking forward to a fun session. I'll be taking notes alongside all of you, learning something, hopefully today, from Shane and from Marilyn. So I'm a researcher, I'm an author, I'm a speaker based in Huntsville, Alabama, as I mentioned in the chat a minute ago. And I started my career in HR as a recruiter. I was recruiting Black Hawk helicopter instructor pilots. So all kinds of fun work in that space. And now we use the research we develop to help leaders like all of you make better decisions, know what to do, how to make the right next choice. And so I'll weave some of that into the conversation today, but hopefully you'll get both sides from me, not just the data, but the practical side as well. So Todd, I know we're all glad to be here, ready to kick it off.
Just go over what we're talking about. A number of people have hopped on the last couple of minutes, including a number of AI assistants have hopped on the last couple of minutes. So welcome to both of those. We are talking about tech stacks, tech stack overload, tech stack consolidation. A lot of people here have seen those PDFs or graphics where they show the talent acquisition ecosystem, and they have all these logos of companies all stuffed on a page, showing just how many tools there are now. And in some companies, there are that many tools. There's like dozens of tools. Some of them are duplicating and overlapping. Some of them are with features that are part of other tools. And so it can get a little confusing, and some companies are working on streamlining that and making heads or tails of that. We're going to talk about this challenge. I'm going to talk about what to do about it. Let's start with Marilyn and talk about why this exists now. Is there anything different that's causing this challenge now? Like why so many tools are being used by some organizations, at least?
Oh, Todd, that's a really good question. You know, I mean, at the core of it, tech stack complexity, or call it sophistication, I mean, this is a big problem. And I suspect that it's maybe the reason is both the same and different for a lot of organizations that end up dealing with tech stack complexity in their people systems. I mean, on one hand, right, we are experiencing an explosion of innovation in our space, and it's only getting, increasing on a daily basis. And so, and what we're seeing is a lot of solutions that are highly specialized. They're like an inch wide and a mile deep. And on the other hand, we've got, having been on the employer side, it's no one wakes up and says, hey, I want a complex tech stack, and in fact, in my background is, I worked for a couple of the vendors that were one vendors to love, and that's what we were offering. So, but as an employer, you end up with probably an organic growth process where you start with a decision and then you add something's missing and you add on to that, and then, well, let's do this as well. And so what were good ideas at the time, then you end up in a situation where there is a little bit, perhaps you end up with a hot mess, and maybe some of you guys are in that situation. I've worked, well, let me just back up here. I think it's really important for organizations to think about the process that they go through for making good choices on where to standardize and where to innovate. And that innovation that we are doing in our people processes with lots and lots of, call it tech stack providers, even including in recruitment, these are some of the tools that could be giving us competitive differentiation for our businesses over our rivals. So, there isn't a good or a bad in it. It's just that I think that we need to be mindful of this and think about why it is that we're doing it. And then if you're a leader and you've perhaps recently taken on a new opportunity, or you've grown into, with your organization, into a spot where you're looking at what you have, perhaps the question becomes, what do you do with it and where to begin? So I think there's a lot there. So
Ben, you did some research into this, is more better? Is it correlated? Like the more technologies or software you have, is that better? You studied that, and what'd you find out?
You said more better, and it sounded like you were speaking Southern there for a second, so I was appreciating it.
Yeah.
More better, that's the way to say it. So we did some research a few years ago, and we looked at this because I wanted to understand, if we have more things at our disposal, does that benefit us, right? I just posted in a chat a second ago, like even within talent acquisition, you can list, a dozen discrete little areas of technology if you have different tools for different things. And so we want to understand that. And so we asked employers, how many different things are you using across your spectrum of HR and talent? And then we started looking at the outcomes they talked about. Are you more productive? Can you get more done? And as you might expect, as they had more tools, they said, we can get more done. That sort of tracked. But interestingly enough, at the same time as that was tracking up, another number was tracking down, almost the exact same rate they crossed. And that downward spiral, downward trend was, we have clarity into what's going on. I know we'll talk about that in the conversation today, about having a source of truth and all of that as it relates to this, because it's a big problem this creates, is having all these tools creates different islands of data in the business. And you're like, I was living on an island, which I want to live on. Which one is the truth? Which one is the right one? And so that's the problem we see there. So yes, you can get more done. Technically, that's what we're seeing in the research. But for any of you out there who are in that state right now, are like, yeah, I can get a lot of things done at these different places, but We also struggle to bring that data back together, make sure it's clean, make sure it's accurate, make sure we can make a decision on it, because that's where some of the problems start to exist.
Before we get into what to do about this challenge, Shane, anything else about why this exists that we haven't already talked about?
Yeah, well, I love that Ben mentioned sort of the data challenges. So really, from the data perspective, there are two problems. One is having multiple, sometimes conflicting sources for the same data point. You've got two different measures. Which one do you use? I think we'll probably talk a little bit about that. And then the other is fragmentation. In an ideal world, you would think about the hire to retire process as a single journey. The reality is, as Ben pointed out, you've got different tools for 15 things in recruiting. And then once you get into the employee lifecycle, you've got performance systems, L&D systems, engagement surveys, all these disparate data sources. And so, at big companies, you can fund a people analytics team to join all this data, buy the tools that you need to do that, and craft one dashboard that represents the full employee lifecycle. But most companies don't have the resources for that. So, creates a real challenge in terms of reporting, transparency, continuity, and trust. If you're reporting one thing out of one system and one thing out of another system, it's not very confidence inspiring. So that's sort of the data challenges. The other reason this is coming up now is it's a really expensive problem, especially in an environment like we have today, where folks are looking at creative ways to cut costs. There's a lot of software rationalization projects going on. Folks looking at login data and seeing that some of the tools we're buying people aren't using, and some of the tools we're buying are redundant. So it can be a real source of cost and inefficiency.
Since we've gone 12 minutes without mentioning the letters AI, which seems like a record these days, how is AI, and you, Shane, or anyone, Ben, Marilyn, how is AI creating, exacerbating or not this challenge?
I'll throw a quick comment on that. I've been writing a lot on this lately, speaking on it, and it's one of the things that's sort of on my heart to talk about, because all the AI tools we're looking at in the market, the value comes from having good data to base a prediction on. That's all AI is really about, is using the data to predict what happens next and give us some ideas on what to do as talent leaders. And if we're trying to do this, as Shane, you just mentioned, all the challenges with having data that you can trust and believe in. By the way, I wrote this as you're like, this is what we think it is, and this is what it more like what it really is, if it's even that clean, right? That's what we end up with. And it's really hard for AI to predict what's next, to give us recommendations we can take action on as talent leaders, because the data aren't clean, they aren't accurate, they aren't clear, they aren't concise, all those sorts of things. And the good news is that means a human probably needs to be in the mix, but the bad news is we still don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think AI can exacerbate the problem, because sometimes it's really opaque as to how it arrived at that answer. So if you are already having trouble, with multiple data sources, and you get an AI response that you can't track back to the specific source, it can actually make your life harder.
Interesting. Let's get into what to do about this challenge of possibly too many tools, or at least tools that may duplicate, and so on. What a company or organization might do about it, and what you've seen people do about it. Start with Marilyn. First of all, whose responsibility is it to do something about this? What would their title be, or who might they be?
You're opening up some battle scars here now, Todd, in terms of arm wrestling. I remember early days in HR, we were having an office war, and it was about who owned employee data. Was it payroll or HR? And it was the wrong conversation. And so I think the same principle applies to when we think about like our overall systems. We've actually got a lot of different stakeholders across an organization that need and care and consume employee data in a variety of ways for business decisions. And I think if we start maybe not thinking about it as a single person or a single function, but how as a business or an entity do we want to manage this asset for our business, and for what purpose? So one of the things that I've done in my travels is worked with my clients, and this is in a previous life where my clients were on the employer side, but in conjunction with the implementation of technology, we instituted a governance process for the growth and the evolution of, call it the people tech stack, moving forward. And so it's really getting, the various constituents together, and then who has a voice, a vote, and a veto, for what purpose, what are the different levels of, you've all the way from data governance, process governance, system governance. I mean, there's actually multiple different levels. And once we start talking with each other, then we gain alignment and understanding. But I think if we start with a functional area, and sometimes what we're doing is we're seeing a leader emerge. If you don't have this in your organization, you see somebody who's either passionate about the topic or cares deeply about it, but they may be the tip of the spear that hopefully, instead of arguing with what I did, don't do that, of whose responsibility is it? How can we as a group come together and handle this opportunity for our business?
Ben, you've had experience with an organization that has done something. Tell us about it.
Yeah, to solve for that. The first thing, really quickly, Marilyn, the last piece that you shared there, instead of like fighting with each other, how we fight together for this outcome we're looking for, I think that's really important to come around, to really highlight. That applies in a lot of areas, not just when it comes to data management and applications at work. A friend of mine's a marriage therapist. It's like relationships change when you stop fighting with each other and start fighting together for a thing you both care about. And that's what you're talking about there. Absolutely. Yeah, Todd. So one of the stories of one of my good friends works in the office, the CIO over at NASA, and she was telling about some of this work they were trying to do, because they realized, again, they have this laundry list of applications that people have access to on site, and they have to sort of approve access to those different applications as they come along. And they realized that it had really gotten out of hand. And so they're like, what are we going to do about this? Well, we could decide, let's say us four here who are talking to the audience out there, y'all are all trying to pick solutions, pick applications, and we're going to make a decision as a committee on what you can use or not. That's guaranteed to make some of you mad at us. And so instead they said, let's put this burden back on this population that's trying to make a decision what to use. Let's tell them, when you bring us something you want to use, you've got to pick one or two other things that we're going to sunset and not use anymore. So we can't just add more forevermore, but we've got to add and substitute and change out and say, hey, this one's a better version of that. It actually does what these two systems do. We're going to put that burden back on them to do that, versus us trying to sort through and figure out, do we have a solution that does this or not? And that changed the conversation for them, not just by making it less about butting heads thing, but more about, when I'm looking for a tool, I don't just get swept up in, oh, that's really great, that would make my job easier. But, oh, does it make it easier than that one does? And I start to really make these judgment calls as an individual contributor, as a leader in a team, as a function within the business. So that sort of thing, I think, really ties into this conversation. I don't know that we can make it like the Wild West. Everybody just go make your decisions and we'll see what happens. But putting a little bit of the burden back on the users themselves to advocate for it in a different way, not just I need this, but I need this in lieu of that, that creates a different sort of conversation. And I think it's less likely to get a no than sort of a conversation about which one brings the most value. So, there's a fun story for you that it can be done, and there are some creative ways of doing it. And that story, that's coming not from someone on the talent side even, but someone on the technology side and the data side to make that happen.
That makes sense. Good. Shane, you also have seen companies try to reorganize their tech stacks. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I guess one thing I would say is, it's not always your fault. Sometimes you inherit a set of systems that have redundancies already. Sometimes the tools that you're bringing on, their roadmap develops these redundancies. Some so launches a chat feature or analytics. So I think there's something to be said here about really evaluating those tools, particularly when it comes to like reporting. So the example I would share, one of the companies I was at, we had a legacy recruiting reporting system. We had the reporting out of the ATS, and then we had a reporting system that we were using for HR, but expanding into recruiting. So you have potentially three different answers to the same question, and all three were different. it's not that they're wrong necessarily. I think once you get under the hood, there's a lot of squishiness to some of these data definitions and a lot of different ways you can calculate certain things. Um, there's a whole way you can kind of evaluate this. I think something that's really important when choosing what your source of truth is to make sure that you understand that logic and how they're getting to that answer. And that aligns with how you want to speak to it and how your company views that metric. So a couple examples of this, I see it all the time with pass-through rates. There are certain ways to code up funnel metrics where this might be a little bit too in the weeds, but looking at the entry of each stage, and that assumes that your stages are in the same order, right? If you're looking at the entry of recruiter screen and the entry of hiring manager screen, if you skip, that can create issues. Whereas other tools might look at the entry and then the exit of a particular stage. So there's really a key piece here, which is working with the supplier and hopefully getting access to those analysts to understand how it's being calculated. And a great tool with great support will actually make calculation changes to accommodate some of the messiness in your data for you.
Data, Marilyn, any thoughts on that? I mean, that's one of the goals of the tech stack, and part of it is to make a quality hire, but then another is to figure out how to do that, how to make quality hires, what is leading to a hire, what sourcing channels are working, how long is it taking, who's staying longer, where are there screening questions that tie to tenure. All these things are all part of the whole point of the tech stack. And if the data is confusing, with one thing says 33 days and another says 38 days, it's not too helpful, I suppose. So talk to us, Marilyn, about that, about any tips on figuring out what data is the right data.
Right. I mean, just it's an important question. And so there's what's going through my brain right now is like, if we think about like what makes us successful in our roles and in our jobs, there's I'll just put it crudely, butts and seats, right? But then there's this whole other set of skills that we need in not only recruiting, but really call it all aspects of HR and probably all aspects of business professionals, is the measurement side of what it is that we're doing and contributing to our businesses. And what are the benchmarks, and what are things that we care about, and how are we going to move the needle? How do we know if we're getting better? And are we aligned? And so the beauty of these tech stacks is a lot of them will come with, all of these things, but what's incumbent on us is to understand it. So, it's more than, call it doing, if you would, that job. It's really understanding what great looks like, and then dialing that back all the way through to the data supported by the processes. And are we doing the right things, and are we doing the right things right? So, I mean, the data governance, I mean, it is just such a huge thing. And I don't think that, we can shy away from that, especially with what's coming with AI. Otherwise, we have bad decisions potentially being made faster. And so we got to get our house clean. I think there's no ifs, ands about it. So that's my soapbox for the moment.
No, that's good. And by the way, we will get to the question. I see that there is a question, and we'll get to that.
Okay.
Your thoughts, Ben, on this issue of data. What's the right data? How do you know what's the right data? And reconciling different pieces of data that maybe duplicate or don't square with each other.
I am flashing back my mind when I was recruiting years ago, and I was trying to build my own CRM using like an email marketing tool and hooking into the things. Like, think about trying to get the data sources all to line up and everything else was a pain then, and it's again even more of a pain now. One of the ways I talk about this, less about the pick this or pick that source. I know Shane has some thoughts on that, but one of the things that I'll say is, if you are of the opinion that does it really big of a deal? Does it really matter that much if we have this thinks is this, that thinks is that? Does it matter that much? I would argue that having unclear data in your sales pipeline costs your business in terms of inefficient activities. They're targeting the wrong people. Having your marketing pipeline it's a waste of time, right? Having your financial systems, yeah, we have some problems, some issues, some errors and challenges. And so having unclear data when it comes to your talent, I would argue, does matter, does slow you down, makes you less responsive. You miss that great candidate because someone else got them before you could, because you just weren't quick enough off the draw because you're using the wrong set of data. So I would argue that really getting clear on this, sort of doubling down on what Marilyn's sharing here. Not a single person listening to my voice right now said, you know what I really want to do? I want to get into the world of talent and be great at governance. That's what I want to spend my time on. No one said that ever. And yet to be great at some of these other things, to be great at being a people leader, Shane, Marilyn, right? We know you have to be good at some of those other sorts of things that are less fun, because that enables you, when you're doing the work, to know it's the right kind of work. Shane, anything you want to chime in on and kick in there as far as your experiences?
No, I love the analogy you just drew to Salesforce data and garbage in, garbage out on the input side. I think you see this all the time in recruiting, and it's something, when I go in and build analytics, HR analytics are usually pretty straightforward, right? Because they're based on clean workday data that folks are getting paid off of. There's not a lot of ambiguity. And so you might stand up, HR analytics very quickly, and you really have to level set with how long it's going to take to get the recruiting analytics right, because recruiting is much messier. You've got recruiters going through a million actions a minute, sometimes doing the exact wrong thing and then backing it up. And so, similar to like a sales team that might not have a sales ops person, and when that person comes in and starts looking at these opportunities, they actually realize our pipeline is all garbage. It's kind of similar on the recruiting side. Like, you need a recruiting ops person, and you need to start getting that data into folks' hands for them to realize, like, oh, this is the impact that not closing out closed candidates is having on our time and stage data. So there's really there's an on the ground component to this that I think, a lot of folks don't think about, and is really a huge part of the lift. And I'm not going to use the word governance because I hate that word, but that's exactly what it is, right? It's driving the behavior change to get the clean result that you need. It's really important on the recruiting side.
Yeah, it's on the recruiting data, and then the process changes, especially like with AI that's occurring. Like, for example, bots are applying for, on behalf of candidates for jobs. And there's a question actually in the chat from Peter, and it was interesting. Peter, I don't know if you were on Facebook in the last 24 hours and put a question into Hung Lee's recruiting brain food, but this very question was, I saw that earlier, something close to it anyways, earlier today. And basically dealing with the applicant flow, right? And this tension that happens between too much and ease of candidate experience, as well as being able to sort through the people who really, should be considered for the role. It seems like the noise keeps amplifying, and are we even getting any better? And so I'm not sure I have the answers on this for you, but it was just really interesting that the question was identical to something that I saw at about 5 o'clock this morning. So
on the whole data topic, Marilyn, integration, and if you have any thoughts on that, I mean, that's part of the challenge here, right? In trying to trying to figure out what data is the right data and what data that you want, is you have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 technologies, and they may not all be fully integrated with each other. We could, of course, have another webinar on just that topic, but any thoughts on integration?
Okay, so speaking of soapboxes here, just a warning in advance. We as users or, competent professionals in the space, we got to be smart about the integration topic, because our tech stacks are sophisticated and we're going to touch multiple systems. Guys, we are asking our vendors the wrong question. We're asking, do you integrate? And of course, all of them are going to say yes, right? Oh yeah, sure. We pass credentials over there, have SSO, I mean, if the vendor says yes, we integrate to a question that wasn't specific, of course, they're not lying, right? They're not deceiving. They're just saying, yes, we're not, there's a big difference between, yeah, I'm passing one data field versus a very sophisticated process that could involve a back and forth and a bidirectional integration that crosses space and time. So what I think that we need to do is start thinking about this just a little bit more, and we need to ask, how do you integrate, right? And we need to ask the vendors in our space, that we are making our partnerships with, we need to ask them, what is your integration strategy? Or, there's one end of the spectrum, they're doing a DIY approach, they're not using any tools.
Yep.
Maybe not have APIs, those kinds of thing, all the way through what is a enterprise class level integration strategy look like. And those are two ends of the continuum. They can say yes to the same question. And then how does that work in our system? So we need to know, we need to go deeper onto this topic in our due diligence, even with what we might even have inherited today. So Shane, I don't know if you ended up in that when you weren't to blame. You came in, you had the superhero cape on. How did you figure that kind of thing out in your travels?
Well, I think you raise a really great point. Integrations are not one size fits all. Some are native and easy to set up and robust, and some are like literally a Zapier connection that's been codified. So I think it's a great point you raised about understanding the depth of the integrations. I think that's a little bit foreign sometimes to folks in our roles, because we're not technical folks. So if the vendor can't explain this in a way that is understandable to you as the business owner, that also says something, right? If they can't point to a customer that they are happy to put you on the phone with who has done this successfully, that says something too. So I think it would just underscore your point about probe for weakness in terms of the depth of the integrations, because that's a really, really key part of understanding your purchase up front.
Yeah, talk to other firms. Yeah, using a similar tech stack. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's all about how you integrate, not do you integrate. That's right. Good. Let's take one of these questions right now and hold a couple others. I think we addressed one of them, but let's hold Roland's and take Frank's. The case studies on the minimization of the tech stack to yield the desired output or outcomes. Kind of got into that a little with the NASA and more. Does anyone have anything else to say on that before we go on?
I'll just say that that's this piece we're about to talk about specifically in the agenda, Frank. So we're going to talk about some of the things to be thinking about, not necessarily case studies, but the strategy around preventing you from getting that spot, for getting someone else from ending up in Shane's boots, having to figure out how to pick up the pieces and make sense of the mess. Like the whole, we're going to wrap up with some of those practical pieces there. But again, yes, Todd, the NASA story is a good example of one of the strategies you can think about trying to put that burden back on the others. You can just have a different sort of approach to gatekeeping the technology selection and purchase process, right? Having the right stakeholders in the room, things like that, changing that up a little bit instead of it being a little more freewheeling, depending on how it is at your organization. But definitely that's the intent of this last portion, is we're going to try to give you some ideas on how to prevent that from happening. And for those of you who are already in that spot, you've heard a couple of things already from us about ways to go and things to do to try to alleviate some of that burden.
Yeah,
just that people. So go ahead.
So to add to that, I would love to read a few case studies on this as well. My guess would be that this is very company dependent, because if you are a smaller company with less resources, then those integrations are super taxing, and you might be willing to sacrifice functionality in one area so that you're all in one tool. If you're a bigger company with resources, then maybe you do want best in class of each specific piece of functionality, and you can support the integrations and the data governance and all that stuff. I don't know if there's a one size fits all answer to that, but there are ways to probe for this, and I think we'll talk a little about that in the preventative measures section.
Right. I mean, even
this right now, the beautiful transition. So go ahead.
Oh yeah, just even in the single vendor to love category, the major brands with opposite colors they all have. Even them, they also have some, call it tech stack chaos of their own with M&A. So if you think about it, not one of the big vendors, some more than others, have M&A. And when that happens, that doesn't mean that there is necessarily always even a unified reporting tool that will work in those, call it ecosystems. So maybe a bit better, but there isn't a nirvana that is out there.
Okay.
So so you just have to you have to do the due diligence, I think.
I love that you pointed out the M&A piece. This is also goes under the category of it's not my fault. That just reminded me of the funniest story. When I was at Google, they acquired Motorola. And I remember that time I was in finance, sitting next to the accounting team, who spent a year working on integrating the two companies and the two systems. And I remember they had a party at, once they'd finished kind of the main project, they had a celebration party. And it's been a year of all this hard work. And then next week, Google announced that it was spinning off Motorola, and they had to spend the next year undoing all of the work that they had just done. I think that's a good microcosm into sometimes the treadmill that you get onto with some of these things.
Talk to us, Shane, about procurement, their role in this process.
Yeah, well, we've touched a little bit on, okay, understand the problems. What do we actually do about them? I think a person, in that role of recruiting ops can have the absolute best of intentions in trying to avoid, buying duplicate tools. But the lens that they have is narrow. It's just within HR. So if you look at something like scheduling tools, right, you might be bringing on a good time for very good reason. It's a great scheduling tool for coordination, but your company might be using Calendly on the sales side, and a recruiting person might not know that. So there's really a component of this that has to be governed by the IT function. And so there's a couple ways to do this. One is the procurement process. There should be a architecture review component of procurement requests where the IT folks step in and say, okay, here's the use case. Here's what this does. Is there any redundancy here? And prompt the question. In the case of bringing on a good time, that would get flagged, and then the question would go back out to the business. What is the business case? Given that we have these other tools, explain to me the ROI. I think it's really healthy to be challenged and to be asked to explain the ROI. In Good Time's case, there's a really good argument to be made, and I've brought Good Time on in places that had Calendly. But just the exercise of having to make that argument is really healthy. And I think the IT team needs to flag that. If you can do it at the procurement process, great. But some things are still going to slip through the cracks. So I think regular, org-wide reviews to catch duplicate tools missed in procurement. That's another critical function of likely the overarching kind of IT department. The last thing I'll say on this topic is, we mentioned this briefly, but understanding the roadmap as you're purchasing the tools, because you might be buying a tool that's developing a solution that's going to be as good or better than something that you have, and that might be available in a year. Well, you should know that when you purchase this tool, because your renewal for that other tool might be coming up, within the next year. And so seeing around the corners a little bit by also understanding the roadmap and where there could be duplication there is an important piece.
What about your thoughts, Ben, on IT's role here?
IT has a special place in that. And Shane, what you were just saying, sort of like what Rachel was saying there about being an advocate for knowing the roadmap, where it plugs in, and even from her case, the vendors want to hear from you on what sort of things you want in the product sometimes. And so be willing to speak up. From an IT perspective, going back to that research I mentioned earlier, we actually didn't just survey HR and talent leaders, we surveyed IT leaders too, to understand their perceptions on HR technology projects. And the thing that stuck out to me, to boil it down from the 1,000+ companies we looked at around the world, really the conversation on the HR side or on the IT side was, we want to be used, we want to partner, put me in, coach, I'm here, I'm ready to help out. And the sentiment on the HR side was, we'll call you if we need you, we got this. Generally, we kind of have our own bubble, stay out of it unless we invite you into the sandbox. And I get that. I've worked in companies where IT was a little heavy-handed, but at the same time, as you were sharing some of the stories there, Shane, there's a way they can plug into the conversation. They see this across not just the HR and talent stack, but across marketing tools and supply chain tools and all these other sorts of things. They spend their days looking at those sorts of integrations, at the data pieces, at some of the other things here. They may have some secret tips on how to get to a better demo experience or other things that they just spend more time doing. We're not full-time technology selection and management people. That's not what we do. We are the people. That's where we spend the majority of our time because we're required to do. So that was a big thing that stood out to me in the data is they're looking for a way to plug in. And even if you don't want them all in your business, you can find a way to invite them into that conversation in a limited way so that it's not a yes, no, but it's a how can we help? How do we support? I talked to a company recently that had just consolidated down. I was talking to their head of talent, and they had multiple tools across interview analytics, sourcing tools, all these things. She said, listen, we're going to do like scorched earth, back down to like just ATS. And the whole team was up in arms, kind of uproar. She said, listen, we're going to start adding back in though, because this new ATS is more fully functional than our last one. And so it has some things that are going to consolidate, and then we'll start adding back in, Shane, go back to your point, where the business case warrants it. Not just because this team is vocal, not just because we like it, but because it adds value in a measurable way that we can prove. And the business is then happy to spend the money on it because they see that it's going to turn that investment into more value, whether it's better quality hiring, whether it's faster hiring, or whatever the metrics you're looking at there. They know that it's worthwhile, and not just because I'm buddies with the person in finance and I talk them into saying yes, or whatever, like whatever other kind of silly things you want to point out there. So there's definitely a place they can play.
Ben, just to add to that, you were talking about partnering with IT. Who better to evaluate the depth of integration than IT? We were just talking about how important that is. So IT is your friend. Treat them as such.
All right, we have talked about why this is a challenge. We've talked about what to do about it and what some organizations are doing about it. We've talked about how to kind of nip it in the bud and how to prevent it with procurement, with IT. I think we should take some of these questions. We also have a question that came in through the Q&A bar over there. But and I think a couple of these questions are semi-related, semi-not, but that's totally fine. In this one, you probably saw it, about what tools measure the skills match between a person and a project. Does anyone want to take that? This is about matching skills between a job and a person. I'm interested in tools that implement automation over tools that merely support people-intensive processes. Shane, any thoughts on that at all?
Oh boy, this is a tough one. There are a number of solutions out there that can skill match between what someone's claiming on their LinkedIn or their resume versus what's on the job description. The best ones out there will look not just at what's being said, but also infer new things about the candidate. So I think Findem does a great job of this on the candidate side. They can look at this person's background and create sort of this 3D persona and take other pieces of information to infer things that they themselves didn't list. And then on the tools that are good at the matching, they'll actually look at the JD, they'll look at other JDs in their ecosystem and figure out if this is a sloppily written JD, like what pieces are missing. I have not evaluated these in a while. I know, circa 3-4 years ago, Eightfold seemed to be at the forefront of the skills matching. But I do know that there's a couple of popular ATSs that are looking at this functionality. And so I'm hoping that we'll see more of it. It is a little tricky though. A lot of legal departments, the way the rules are written right now on AI, makes it very hard for you to use it in HR and legal. It's explicitly not allowed to be used for things that can impact hiring decisions. I know because I got shut down by my legal team for something that was even tangential to that. So depending on your company's risk tolerance, there's obviously a huge value add to being able to cut down on the application review, which feels like it's gotten 10x more burdensome in the last year. But I think there's a balance there between kind of the risk and the reward.
Marilyn, I've got something. Do you have anything to share there? Or
Yeah, I mean, let me bring up the rear. So you go ahead.
So a couple of things. Shane, the last thing you said there was the application burdens got worse. Yes, for sure. Number one, it's an employer's market. There's more candidates looking for work, but also some of the AI tools that let candidates automatically apply are creating real problems. Talking to a life sciences company the other day, they used to get 20,000 resumes a month. Now they're getting 20,000 resumes every 2.5 days. And their team is like, that's just more people to say no to. It's not, it's not a good thing for us. We already have enough. We don't need more. So to the point of the question there, Roland, a couple of things. Yes, I was going to say, Findem, no incentive for me to say this. Findem does some good stuff with their 3D data. Definitely would agree with that, what Shane said. Other things to think about, like beyond the hiring point, we also need to match skills for people with projects and roles, things like that. So companies like Glider are doing some good things there. There's a company called NeoBrain that's doing some creative things there on the project piece. I can't mention their customer, but it's one of the biggest consulting firms in the world. Uses them to build a project team rapidly, knowing all the skills of that team. So there are some good ones out there, both pre-hire and post-hire, for matching up internally, knowing those skills pieces. So again, I'm happy to chat offline if someone wants some deeper examples and things like that. But there are some good ones for sure. Marilyn, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll see you in Vegas, actually, definitely, Ben, and hopefully Todd and Shane at the Unleash conference, and maybe you guys are going to some ones that are happening even next month. This is like a super hot topic, like what's happening in skills. What I am seeing is you need to take a look at, there isn't like necessarily good solutions that are one size fits all. So what I'm seeing is that there's different types of tech and capability combined with, what kind of science are they using behind the scenes, and what are the use cases. But I'm seeing a degree of specialization in ones that excel in doing the skills matching and ranking and recognizing for specific instances. So, for frontline workers that are high volume is a whole different deal than when you're dealing at the executive level, right? And so, so anyway, that's just one of the patterns that I'm seeing. And then some of the advice is, don't try to take like a one size fits all for your whole darn company and for every position that you might be recruiting for, but really start to be very selective in where, in the learning as well, and the application of that, and certainly the vendor selection, perhaps, of where you're going to get the most bang for your buck and the utility for your business. And so that can range wildly. So now, will this always be the case, or am I right in this? This is just my opinion, but I'm seeing capability and specialties right now relative to skills. And that's also some of the advice on where to begin. If you're thinking about that, is don't try to do your whole company. That's like a kamikaze mission. Really just look at perhaps like, where you've got volume, where you've got pivotal roles, where you've got strategic or competitive advantage, and then do some prioritization of your workforce as you start to evaluate and look at the skills.
My observation also is that this is one area where the cultural side of things, the cultural change needed is probably as important as the technology, because some companies have gotten these fancy, expensive technologies that match skills with people. But then when it comes to hire someone, I've seen managers go, we kind of want someone from Salesforce or Google, instead of saying, yeah, we want to hire someone based on skills, which was the entire point of the skills technology. They kind of default to their behaviors that the managers or others have just learned over the years. They look for what they've always looked for. And putting in skills technology is really like part of the battle.
It's like a big change effort. It's like, at the end of the day, I mean, there's a cultural aspect, a huge cultural set of activities that happen in that matchmaking process. And then we try to basically be super analytical and fully comply with uniform employment guidelines and all of the, pure play. What is the logical decision? And meshing that too is not an easy thing. Yeah.
We have a
So
question.
good
Sorry.
one.
Another question, which is a little, I mentioned earlier, came in through the Q&A bar here. It's a little not 100% about tech stacks, but that's okay. Oh, is it gone? It's gone. The question just disappeared on me, I think. Well, oh, here it is. It's the best way to upskill as an HR professional in the tech aspects of the field. There's specific certifications or education that sets up for success and communicates for organizations your knowledge base on an SME level. So they're talking about HR professional upskilling on technology. I suppose AI is probably a big part of that, I'm guessing. Anyone have any advice there
Yeah,
for?
I actually I do, Todd. This is something I've been looking into recently. I have been using AI to craft myself a learning course about AI.
Nice.
So Claude right now is my favorite tool, but in my view, it's going to be critical for us to be able to use AI well. I think leveraging AI is going to further stratify the haves from the have-nots in talent. So it's a great question to be asking yourself right now. Um, where I see this most effective, the actual way we interact with AI is going to change quite a bit. Right now, it's prompt engineering, but we've got agents right around the corner, and these models get released every few months that make prompt engineering less and less important because they get better and better at natural language. So in my mind, kind of learn by doing and using these models is the best way to learn how to interact with the model. But what makes you effective is how do you plug that into your tools? So I think one area I would recommend exploring is um, how do you actually connect an AI engine to the tools? There's trainings that you can do around integration tools like Zapier and Fortran, having some basic understanding of basic Python can be helpful. So that's where I've kind of been going is like, hey, it'd be really cool if I could actually design the connector to ask ChatGPT this thing and then punch it back into the system. But I recommend explain exactly what you're trying to do to the AI, and it will tell you and recommend the courses. Funny
Nice.
enough.
Nice. Yeah, it seems like there's a webinar every other week, well, more often, about how what HR people should know about generative AI and all sorts of related topics. So there's no shortage of things to learn if someone doesn't know how or want to take the step that you did, Shane. Other thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, on the yeah, and we all need to, we all have to be there. We have to be learning by doing. And so Shane, very clever, good share, took notes. There are a couple things that are, call it know the foundational basics. And so it's important to also know the emerging tech, but also there's just like the basic foundations, right? We need to have to know how to read and do arithmetic. There is a IRIM, there's a professional association, ihrim.org, that offers HRIP, I believe is the designation for specific for our space. And they used to be a lot bigger than they are today and probably rivaled the HR Tech Show that is every year in the fall by the publishers of HR Executive Magazine. But there is certification. And so getting a foundation in some of the basics as well, I think is also very, very important. And if you do happen to be working for an employer that is using one of the major brands or larger vendors, oftentimes they will offer their own certification, specific to Workday or SAP SuccessFactors or Oracle. There are training programs. So I would say if you can take as much as you can and educate yourself, whatever the tech stack that you're currently using, but take advantage of the education opportunities and make sure you put it on your own LinkedIn profile, but you got to stay current. So Ben, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but
I was going to say the publisher would take one of my children if I didn't mention that there's a book that you could read that would tell you many of these things. The third edition is about to be published later this year, and it's hard writing a book on AI because it changes all the time. But the truth is, like Shane, you're talking about this stuff that's going to evolve and continue to change, and the skills, as you said, that you're going to need 6 months from now will be different from the ones you needed 6 months ago. So that's always evolving. I would say the first place my mind went was not where yours went, Shane. It was more like what Marilyn was thinking, like some of the nuts and bolts of how do I use some of these tools and technologies that we use in HR every day. The part we didn't talk about as much is on the data side. Now, none of us can be good at everything. Okay, we can't be experts in all things. But if you have a natural inclination towards the data side and analytics and knowing how that works and how those things fit together and the stories you can tell with it, I would encourage you to lean on that because that is going to become a better and more valuable piece of this function, this job in the future. The AI tools are steadily consuming more parts of the work we do, but they're not telling stories with the data in a way that gets people to change behaviors. And as we've already heard from every one of the panelists has mentioned, like behavior change is a big part of this problem that we're talking about here today. But it's also an opportunity to influence the right solution as well. So that's where I would go is storytelling, using the data. If you're not comfortable with that yet, there are plenty of places you can look for ways to start getting more comfortable with how to start telling those stories, how to pull things together, and how to make that meaningful. That would be my encouragement.
I'm still thinking about HRIP. When Marilyn put that in there, I thought she was making a joke, like yeah.
Rest in peace.
I mean,
Yeah,
it is, yeah. Hey, there's another one too. There is, you know, most people know about the PMP, right? But there was a time when there weren't too many PMPs, you know, project management professionals, and there's a whole, you know, professional certification. There is now one, and I put this in link. My nephew has just gone through it. I think he took his test this week. The Global Data Management Community, and so there's a CDMP, and so there's now going to be a governance, like professional certification just on data management. So if you really want to get geeky in this or get certified in these kinds of things, and that's not specific to the people or HR side of things, but probably giving you an overall framework. Or if you're looking to bring people onto the team, this is another certification to look through.
I love certifications, but I have a bit of a contrarian view on the AI stuff. I think by the time you take the certification, the course is already old by the time it's published, and the certifications in this particular thing are going to be less meaningful. Better than nothing, but less applicable, I guess. Ben, you were talking about, I mean, we literally have the guy who wrote the book, folks, on the call. I do not envy you having a third edition of an AI book. AI came out, what, like 2 years ago? I gotta imagine you're having to rewrite that thing like 30% of it.
The first edition came out in 2018, and so a lot of it was forward looking. The last one was, well, here's what all came true, here's where the misses were, and here's what we think is going to happen next. But this new one is really about the advent of generative agentic, as you mentioned earlier, some of those newer things, but really coming around to as well, if all these things are true and this trend continues, when those things strip away parts of work, what's left behind? Because that matters to all of us. We want to know what the jobs are going to look like. And it comes down to some of the things we're talking about here, like the storytelling I mentioned a minute ago, influencing behaviors, connecting. We've talked about so many things today. Like Shane, you pushed hard on having a partnership with IT. Partnerships aren't AI things; they're human things, and so we have to lean in on those things because those are skills, tasks, strengths that we have that an algorithm can't easily replicate.
We are running low on time. We got more questions and more great questions than what we can do with. So for Trevor, I see, and others who have questions, please do not hesitate to contact any of the four of us on LinkedIn and elsewhere. Please do so, or anyone else, please connect and ask your questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to everything, but we did get to some. We even have someone, Lioba, who was one of the questioners, who posted takeaways from the meeting. That's fantastic. When your audience is doing that for you, you can't beat that. We are going to send out the recording as well. So there's plenty of opportunities to learn more and rewatch and everything else. In the meantime, I'm going to hand it, by the way, thanks again to Marilyn, Pearson, Hendricks, Ben Eubanks, and Shane Noe. You guys are amazing. I think we brought up so many topics that each could be 2-hour webinars on their own, but nonetheless, we pulled it off in about 58 minutes. I'm going to, so thank you again, and I'm going to hand it back to Austin from Findem to see if there's anything that you want to say. Thanks, Austin.
No, just wanted to thank everybody for joining this conversation with Ben, Marilyn, and Shane, and Todd leading the charge. Thought we covered a lot of great topics. If you do have questions, don't hesitate to reach back out. We will be following up with the replay and some notes from the call in the next day or two. So thanks again, everybody, and thanks especially to our panel.
You.
Bye, everyone.